Okay, so beef brisket is probably one of, if not the most cost-efficient cuts of beef out there. With this particular one, get my camera close so you can see, I got this for about 50 bucks at $4 per pound at my local Piggly Wiggly. This one particularly was on sale. Typically, you can see briskets in most supermarkets in about the 65 to even up to 85. Some of the bigger ones can go for, 100 depending on their prime, select. This is just a very basic beef brisket. It's nothing special because I'm not going to be smoking this brisket. So I, as you can probably see by my very limited amount of space, live in an apartment and which doesn't allow smokers. So obviously smoking a cut of meat this big is not possible. So while I'm sure the barbecue community out there would probably only use a brisket for long smoking, the price of the brisket at only $4 per pound, if you want to eat more beef, look at this massive honker, it's too cost efficient to really pass up. So as a home cook who has a smoker but honestly can't use it because of my apartment community, you have to go about utilizing it in a different way. So if you watch most barbecue brisket videos, you obviously see them trimming in a normal way. They'll see this side, flip it over. I've admittedly only butchered a couple briskets for barbecue, and this one has a bit of an odd shape. But over here at the leaner end, where it's thinner, has less fat compared to up here at the mohawk, or the fat side, as most people would call it. So obviously you, with barbecue, you'll trim it down for long smokes. You'll trim it down to make it aerodynamic and also make it to where it can cook evenly. But as a home cook, I don't really have to worry about that. Number one, because I'm not cooking this whole thing at once, right? I'm going to trim it. First off, trim the fat like you normally would for a brisket, if not a little bit more, because I'm not too concerned about keeping a fat on there to help protect the meat whenever it roasts or smokes for a long time. Instead, I'm going to cut these up by the different sections and use each one a little bit differently, but mostly in the same way. So I'm going to go ahead and just start trimming it up, kind of get a good look at it. This mohawk up here, I'm going to save some, actually, let me go ahead and grab, that's my dog, Finn, by the way. Oh, shoot, I totally just stepped on him. That is my bad, buddy. He doesn't care. He's a happy dog. So I'm going to grab a couple bowls, just general stainless steel utility bowls. And so this mohawk, I'm going to liberally trim down, and we'll end up trimming it more finely in the future to help save some of this meat on here for a grind. But for the most part, I'm going to pull this off for the fat. And I'm going to make this a couple parts, split this video up into a couple different parts. One, showing you what I do with the lean, and two, showing you what I do with the fattier cuts. The lean we're going to grind up for ground beef, and the lean over here we're going to use for braises, maybe for like a whole roast. That way you can shred it for something like birria or whatever I'm really feeling like it. I'll decide that at a future date. But yeah, so I'm just going to kind of get my knife in here, pull all this fat out. If you were trimming a brisket for barbecue, you would probably end up taking a lot of meat when trimming a brisket. You pull a lot of meat off of it to make it more aerodynamic. I might have mentioned it already, but I don't really have to worry about that because I don't have to worry about aerodynamics. I'm going to either grind it up and use for burgers or for like a jambalaya, or really just a beef and rice, whatever I'm really feeling like. I'm going to go ahead and take some off of this edge too. Most of the outer layer up here is pretty much just fat. And since I'm going to be braising most of it, I actually want to get rid of a lot of that fat. Yeah, so you can feel it right here. It's stiff and hard, freezing. But I want to cut this fat out. And in this video, I'm going to show you, go ahead and slice that, how to turn that into beef tallow, which you can use for any number of recipes. I mostly use it for cooking, but I made beef tallow chocolate chip cookies before. I've left tallow on a smoker. My smoker's at my girlfriend's place right now, but I've left it on the grill for a long time to get a nice smoked tallow. Smoked lard and tallow are really nice to have around the kitchen because while you might not have a smoker, it'll make it to where you can get that sort of smoky flavor you would associate with barbecue without typically having one. There's a big chunk. Also might be better to have a sharper knife. Admittedly, I've been kind of abusive to my knife recently. I need to sharpen it. Yeah, I can feel a little bit of hard fat here. Go ahead, just flip this around. If you're really stringent about not eating a lot of highly refined vegetable oils, beef tallow is something you're naturally going to have around. And this cut specifically, a brisket, is great for getting beef tallow. You'll render it slowly and get a fair bit. Apart from something like pork shoulder and maybe pork loin, this is probably one of the larger cuts of a meat that's not commercially available, but available to most consumers. Let's see, get some more from down here. That's looking all right. Just over tons of bald spots, but oh well. I'm not worried about it. Over here, I can feel how hard this fat is. This brisket's been sitting in the fridge too. I just pulled it out of the fridge, and I think that for slicing fat, that's kind of what you want to have. Yeah, you see this hard layer of white fat is exactly what you want for tallow. Gamma, get out of there. I'll get this bit just a little bit more. Typically speaking, I don't keep my hand close to the cut. I'll make like, there we go. See, if you kind of scratch, if you're not afraid of getting your hands a little fatty, you can really get a good grip on the meat. Like obviously over here, it's a lot more, I guess you could say, tender than this spot right here. It's thick. So I'm gonna try to get as much of this as I can. And even if you didn't, braising brisket, I'm gonna take a break, come get this little piece right here. It will eventually render, but even while something like a beef stew, having a good amount of fat to it is ideal. You don't want too much, or else, you'll end up falling asleep 5 minutes after you eat everything. I'm gonna trim up some of this sinew. Some parts like this, you can kind of just grab. It's good to get those too. Let's see, I can leave that on. This is trimmed up pretty good. Maybe I'll get this edge over here. And if you were trimming this for barbecue, of course, you'd slice around the outside here, the corners, to make it kind of kind of round. That way when the smoke, depending on how you place it, can roll over it. You'll get a better, more even cook. But, excuse me, that is pretty good. I might take some more out right here. Grab this bottom part. Oh, well, maybe it really does. I sharpen my own knives, and one consequence of that is my knife's sharpness is also dependent on my own. Ooh, almost caught my fingernail there. My own laziness. So this knife is long overdue for sharpening. Oh well. All right, good enough. So now, remember what I said earlier. Up here by the mohawk, the fat tends to be a bit fattier. Over here, it's a bit leaner. So I'm going to cut it in according to the fat content. I'm just going to make about 3 even portions. But these two here at the mohawk and over here at the rump, maybe. Oh, here's a little bit more. I'm just going to make a pretty big cut, a little diagonally with the mohawk right here. You can probably see where I outlined it. I'm just going to run my knife through all of that. All right. And here is my flat or lean. You can see in the actual tissue, there's fat in it, but it's not going to be nearly as much as over here. I can still feel that chunk of fat right there. Tell you what, let me go at it a little bit more. Now that I cut off that lean, I can get in here a little bit better. And I really am trying to just get as much as fat as I can for tallow. Because it takes, a relatively long amount of time to render beef fat. It'll take you probably about an hour. Let's see. Yeah, so you can see the amount of fat that I've built up. It's almost, pound for pound, it almost might be as much as the lean right here, if not more. It feels a tiny bit heavier. But all right, so I'm just going to cut straight down the middle of this one. No cares in the world. This is a fairly thicker cut. Might be better to do this with a sharper knife. All right. And you can see over here on the fatty end, you have a massive clump of fat right here in the middle. And as opposed to the ones, or as opposed to the fat on the outside of it, I don't mind having this layer of fat in the middle. More than likely, I'm either going to roast this whole or, braise this whole and then shred it. So that bit of fat's nice. But if I was going to grind this up for ground beef, I would probably want to cut it out. But that's basically it. What else can I do with this? Maybe I'll cut it. Yeah, I'll cut this in half. Make it easier to store in the freezer. Slice down there just to lay it flat. And then I'll keep this one whole. But that is basically it. Now I'll go ahead and give my hands a wash. About to sanitize this sink later. I got blood on both areas. And first, I'll get my lean. I'm not going to be too careful with the amount of air in there. Try to squeeze as much out as possible, but I'll end up using all of this within maybe a month. So I don't really need to vacuum seal it or anything like that. I'll get this fat into bags. That way, you know, you're not having to cook a lot over a small time, letting it go to waste. But I tend to be pretty careful and careful in the sense that I'm not going to let something go to waste. You know, it's like I spent $50 on a brisket. I'm making damn sure that I use the whole thing. Came out. All right. Oh, excuse me, Mr. Scale. All right. And now I'll grab myself. Wow, where'd my Sharpies go? Well, normally I normally keep my my Sharpies on the top of the fridge up there, but I don't know where the hell they went. Maybe my roommate used them. But all right, so now go ahead, stick these in the freezer. I'll keep these two out. I might grind this one, then freeze it. Grind the lean, I mean. But now for this beef tallow, we're gonna render it. Get some nice, well, this is beef fat. We're gonna render it into beef tallow. But I'm gonna put this back onto my cutting board. I'm just gonna slice this into smaller pieces, maybe about a, I don't know, square inch. The smaller the better. But I am, of course, lazy. I don't feel like being extra. Some of them you probably, you know, they're thinner, so you don't have to worry about it, but a bigger chunk like this right here, you definitely want to slice. That way, you have more surface area. The fat will render quicker. All right, so I'm sure you could have got more off that brisket, but typically, this is about the amount that I cut off. Put this back into our bowl. And then over to our stock pot. If you have a little bit less amount of beef tallow than this, feel free to use a smaller pot, but I have a relatively larger amount. So using a high-walled stock pot, which is most convenient for me. So I'm gonna put this into a cold pan. I've seen a lot of people cover it with water. I'm not gonna do that today. And then I'm gonna put it on medium-low heat. As that pan starts to heat up slowly, it will render out that fat. And that's why you don't need to worry about lining the bottom of the pan with oil, because essentially you're making your own oil. And then I'd say every 10 minutes you come back and stir it. The time it takes for the tallow to fully render is totally dependent on the cut that you get, the amount of fat you have, etc. So I will come back when this tallow starts to sizzle, the fat starts to render, and we'll come back and stir it and check it maybe every 10 minutes. So I will be right back in. Okay, so it's been about 10-ish minutes. You can see that the meat's still sizzling away, but it's gotten pretty gray. While it might look nasty, that is a good sign. The meat's starting to cook. That fat is still rendering. You might notice little bits that start to get browned. That's still a good sign. That's what you want. By the end of this cook, after all the fat has rendered, the meat will get crisp, you know, like overcooked bacon. That's, believe me when I say that's what you want. I'll bring you back, of course, whenever the meat has fully rendered, but I wanted to show, might be hard to tell on some of these pieces depending on the color balance, but you can see at the tip of my spatula right here, one little piece is starting to get kind of brown on these smaller bits. That's probably a piece of beef that got cut into the fat. Those will render out first. But you just want to keep stirring it, let that moisture evaporate, and then eventually you'll only be left with the fat. So I'll check back in another 10 minutes, and we'll see how it's looking. All right. All right, so it's been about 25, 30 minutes. And you can see at this point that the beef has completely crisped up. The fat is covering the bottom and almost completely submerging the beef in the pot. So at this point, we'll go ahead and turn off the heat. Spatula down there. And you can wait for this to cool off, but I am impatient. So I'm just gonna go ahead, and there's a couple different ways you can strain it. I'm just gonna put it through a fine mesh sieve. Get all that beef in there too. There we go. Take that off the heat. And all right, so I'm gonna let this cool down. I'd give it maybe 5 minutes. It's still boiling hot. You know, oil carries heat a lot more efficiently than something like water or hell, even air. I'll let this cool down for a bit. Maybe we'll just wait for it. Yeah, you know what? I take that back. We're gonna go ahead and transfer it into a different. I'm gonna transfer it into a mason jar. Be pretty careful not to burn myself. If you got a funnel, that'd be nice. And for these baked bits here, I'm just gonna throw them away. You can give them as snacks or give them as snacks to your dog or whatnot. But Finn has a very sensitive stomach, so you can probably see in the bottom of the bowl here, there's a little bit of residue that passed through that fine mesh sieve. You could pass it through again with some cheesecloth and get most of it out, but I'm fine with sparing a bit of tallow. I'm gonna do a strong pour here to make sure that none goes back towards me. And I'll stop it before you see the debris left in there. You can strain it again to get that last little bit of tallow, but I'm not too concerned about it. Grab a paper towel, get that last little bit of oil. And there you go. I'd say it's about 3/4 of a quart of beef tallow from you know, roughly dicing the fat off of a single brisket. I don't know why I went and got another one of these. There's another lid right there. I'm not going to push this in tight. This beef tallow is still pretty hot. You can feel it through the glass. Yeah, it's not too bad. But you do want to be careful. This stuff can burn you pretty bad. Also, while stirring it, grease burns can be pretty rough, especially since there's no good way of getting that grease off of it. You know, my hands are covered in grease burns. But that's basically it. As soon as these are cool, I don't want them to melt through my garbage bag. I'll toss them, wash the bowl. And for the tallow, when I'm not feeling lazy, a label. See? 117. I'll go ahead and write the what it is and the date. Although, to be honest with you, in my own kitchen, I'm pretty sure I'm going to know what it is. But the date can be helpful, especially since the tallow you can keep out at room temperature. Like I actually have a little bit of a smaller jar over here that I embarrassingly don't have a lid for, but I made this last week. I could combine the two, but I'm planning on using that pretty soon. Well, that is basically it. Thank you for watching, and I hope you learned something. All right, bye-bye now.